Hello, everyone. My name is Stefana Savic, and I'm the organizer of International EPAL Institute. I'm a visual artist from Belgrade, and I'm also the student of Introductory EPAL group. So today we are going to have a conversation about Matjaz's book on Pluto. Hello, Matjaz.
Hello, everyone.
How are you today? How are you today?
I feel quite excited because for some reason we were unable to either present this book in English, which we did last year finally, and then to put it on the Amazon, which appeared just recently with the help of our colleague Dragomir from Skopje.
Yes, so this is the book. And I have to say, I love this book because it was the turning point also in my life. And that's how I discovered actually IPAL Institute and IPAL method and your teachings, Matjaz. So, as you said, the Pluto, Psychodynamics of the Shadow and Complexes, was first published in Slovenian in 2009 and then soon after in Serbian and Hungarian language. And last year it was finally published in English. So you can find the book on Amazon. I'll put the link below the video. So you're welcome to buy. So the foundation of the book consists of audio recordings from a seminar you held in Ljubljana in 2009 on the topic of archetype of Pluto and also the shadow as well as shadow complexes and projections. So can we say that this is a kind of handbook for all those who work on in depth on oneself?
Yes, to work on oneself in depth, which means working psychologically, working psychically, to me is working with one's own psychic images that we obtain either from dreams or from active imagination or from the spontaneous daily visions that we have. So it's this inner eye or the inner cogito, as I choose to call it, the turn on the inward starts to explore one's inner landscape for one sole but all important reason to become an individuum who has got their own individual identity and their individuation process through which one becomes not exactly what Plato thought what one really always was, but what one becomes by virtue of living one's life on one side, and on the other side, working on oneself in depth in a laboratory, in psychoanalysis, or with the IPAL method.
The Pluto archetype in this book is analyzed combining the perspective of mythology, psychoanalysis, and symbolic cosmology. Could you please clarify in what sense your approach differs from the views of classical astrology and psychological astrology?
There is a difference how one sees the whole system of planets, zodiac, houses, aspects as archetypes. By the way, they're not just archetypes, they're also figures, and they're also figures in mythology, and they're also physical and gaseous planets. So the difference is really historical. Classical astrology was terminated from the worldview with the new era. So it was really no longer accepted with universities worldwide with the dawn of the new era. And for a simple reason that in astrology, and of course also in psychological astrology, you have this conjunction of what happens materially and what happens spiritually, archetypally. So this classical presupposition was destroyed with the new era, because nowadays what we do not necessarily in line with the archetypes of the planets and zodiac, whereas the planets, zodiac, and other cosmological archetypes, they are still operating, but they are no longer operating materially. They are operating spiritually solely or only. So the way I see, the way I'm using planets, and among them Pluto, I'm I'm using this in terms of symbolic cosmology. I firmly believe that what one does by working on themselves in depth in psychoanalysis or with the IPAL method, one really creates the images of oneself, of important others, of the world, of God, through their own capacity. And this is the basic metaphysical tenet of the new era and of the modern and the postmodern times. So what we work with the IPAL method when working on oneself in depth, still working on the archetypes represented by the planets, for example, by Pluto, but not in the same way. So planets and other cosmological archetypes are in the eyes of what we see and how we see and how we find meaning. If, for example, one had a dream, a patient of mine had a dream of a numb left hand. He couldn't move his numb left hand, and then it entered into his dream. And when we worked on that image, we realized there is a history, of course, because all psychic images from dreams, active imagination, and spontaneous daily visions, they are historical. It means they have a history. And what we worked with was that he actually rediscovered his history. He writes with his left hand most naturally, but this was suppressed. He was not allowed to write with his left hand. So you can see the meaning of the numb left hand in the dream. Furthermore, his creativity was connected with the left hand because he drew a marvelous image when he was in high school, and he got the best mark for that image. So when we worked with that, so we realized that part of his depression was this suppression of his creativity symbolized in his dream by the numb left hand. And when the IPAL method comes in, and symbolic cosmology and planets, and in this case, really Pluto, this is why I'm giving this example, was when he was able to place this material that we previously analyzed for its historical aspect into his cosmogram or birth chart. He found meaning when connecting this image into his fifth house Pluto. So once he put this image into his cosmogram, into his fifth house Pluto, which was found in his cosmogram in the fifth house, some meaning emerged. Now, this is really the crux of the IPAL method, that we put an actual psychic image into the cosmogram. Meaning thus obtained was by means of the archetypal trajectory of Pluto. He realized there was a taboo there, because that is the part of the dynamics of Pluto. Something was not allowed, so it had to develop largely in the dark for a long time. The development was hindered, of course, in his fifth house, which is the house of cosmological house of creativity, but also of children, traditional astrological symbolics, which is very important, tells us that this is also the area of life where we have children, and when we work with our children and when we raise them. And incidentally, he has a son who is entering puberty and was also starting to be depressed, and their connection, their relationship started to weaken. And once the patient realized that his creativity was hindered, and that this is represented by his psychic image of his numb left hand and the historicity that he had, that he did actually write very well, or draw very well and write very well, natural talent, and that was really liberating at the time. He could renew this activity both for himself. He started to draw the images from this image and other images from his dreams and active imagination as a part of his psychoanalytic treatment with the IPAL method. And thus then invited his son to do it together. So they started to draw. So that is his Pluto in the 5th house. So the meaning that came out was some long delayed, tabooed creativity. Or he had to work on himself in depth first so that he could discover this source of creativity which was buried for such a long time. Now, this is an example of how we can work with IPAL method in a way in which we circumvent the thinking first. Now, this is really important, and it is in itself a Plutonian dimension, because non-thinking, if you want to contact the meaning of Pluto, of transformation, of the depth, of incubation, of becoming, of individuation, of becoming a better version of your own self, then you have to work patiently, not with your thinking, not with your mind, obviously, but you have to find other means how to approach your own individuality that is still not yet on the surface. So this is why we visit our psychic landscape when we work in ourselves in depth, both in psychoanalysis itself and in the IPAL method, so that we open up this source of individuality. Now, how do we open this source of individuality, and why do we need to go in depth for our own individuality? You see, when we stay on the thinking level and we accumulate information, for example, astrological information, psychoanalytic information, mythological information, it's general. It's not yet personal. It's something that you incorporated, interjected, even maybe, by learning it from books, from internet, from lectures, and so on. Whereas when you produce an image, a psychic image, psychic coagulated image, I call it, coagulated because it has a body, in distinction to pure psychic images, which are emotions, when you connect to those images, they are individual. They are individual because they are historic, because they are personal. Okay, so we never dream, or we never, when we do active imagination, we never produce images that would not be our own images and that would not be based on our actual experience. You see, in this patient, he was really contacting his early experience of being um, of him being proscribed from using his left hand, which was the source of creativity. And without that, with sheerly thinking about why is he depressed, he wouldn't get anywhere. So we had to go down and find these images, also other images, which we also put into his cosmogram to unlock bits of meaning, of personal meaning, that strengthen one's spirit and thus help oneself to really exit depression. First, to mourn what was not allowed, to mourn what was lost in childhood or later, and then integrate it, yes, indeed, with the help of planets and zodiac and houses. And this is then cosmology, is not astrology, it is cosmology, because this is the basic means of how you build up your own better version, your own new image of who you are, of a more truly authentic image, individual authentic image of who you are becoming by effectuating the combination and interaction of the four levels of your being. Pluto is really about the psychic dimension of man, and it was discovered in the first half of the 20th century with the proliferation of with the invention and proliferation of psychoanalysis. And humanity realized that one may work on themselves in depth in order to find their own authentic development as an individuum and thus become a better version of oneself and improve your life and also improve your ability to attain your life goals.
Pluto symbolizes haze and also something that is hidden, which can be both a treasure and transformation. So, how can I best relate to Pluto in order to actually experience the transformation from the most terrifying image and find the hidden gold within ourselves?
Yes, the hidden treasure, it was already an old Greek expression for Hades, the god of the underworld, whose mythical narrative explains the archetypal trajectory of what we nowadays call Pluto. And this transformation from the state of one's being when one is being enslaved by the expectations of important others, like one's primary family, the collective. We all have to serve. We have to serve the primary family. We have to serve the collective in some way. And we have to, at some point, start to ask ourselves, what is my own individual identity? How can I travel to my own individual treasure? And how do I become a happy individual who does indeed still live in the collective and in relationships with important others, mutually helping them, and they helping us, of course, in a mutual relationship, but still having something authentic and genuine that we can draw upon. So this is meant in this new metaphysical circumstances of the modern, postmodern times, that we can do this only individually, because the collective will not encourage us to do work on ourselves individually, because for the collective, it is important that we fulfill the task of the collective. And to do the individual work, to really travel into the depth of one's own being, is deeply individual. So the answer to this is you have to start to work individually on yourself in order to find your individual treasure, as we already explained, in one's psychic landscape that is personal, in distinction to the collective being, which is not personal and is merely a model, a general model for one's development, not and does not include this personal journey of becoming an authentic individual human being.
Is this your book on Pluto, the turning point in your writings?
Well, at the time when these seminars were held, these 4 seminars that are really that form the foundation of this book, I was still working as a psychoanalyst, and I was also working with psychological astrology. And it was at that time that the IPAL method started to be born out of the 4 techniques of psychoanalysis, dream psychoanalysis, and then in particular dream analysis, active imagination, and philosophy. And my journey through studying psychology and philosophy, and the history of philosophy in particular, brought me to consider how does one really work with planets and zodiac signs? Is that really an astrology? And I came to a conclusion that this is not astrology. This is cosmology, because one is creating images psychologically, intuitively, physical bodily, and thinkingly that are individual. And of these images consists your new identity, your new developing identity when you work on yourself in depth.
So books that are recently published, the 10 new books from the series Cogito Individuationis, they belong to the field of integrative anthropology and cognitive theory. So it's quite different than Pluto.
Yes, they are now they are these books, and also some other books, the 3 books before them, or 4 books before them, they are part of my developing model of integrative anthropology. Integrative anthropology, integrative for its approach to man as a 4-dimensional being, personal spirit, the individual psyche, your physical body, and your personal mindset are the 4 dimensions of yourself as an individual. And in this model, it is symbolic cosmology, which is based on the astrological symbolism and the wisdom of mythical narratives of all ages, that forms the crux of one of the dimensions only, and that is the spiritual intuitive dimension. So there, one may use cosmogram, planets, and zodiac signs in order to understand one's personal spirit that can be explained with learning of archetypes of your own individual cosmogram. Now, where I differ from the Jungian model, and I think this is also very important, because I was originally a Jungian analyst and now I'm an independent analyst in the IPAL method, is that I don't think that there is a collective unconscious. There cannot be collective unconscious, because the archetypes are both collective and individual, because they form the spirit of the times. And in another sense, they are informative of one's archetypes of your individual individuation. And this personal set of your archetypes that forms the organizational entity, the spiritual organizational entity of your unique individuation process, these are also archetypes, yeah, and they are not collective in that sense. It's an individual set. They are used for individuation, and they are individually composed in your individual set of your individuational archetypes. So archetypes, however you turn them, they cannot be collective, and they also cannot be exclusively individual. They are explained by the mythical narratives. They are like eternal forms of Plato, observable by means of the planetary movements, and yet they do not exist as forms, as archetypes. They do not exist materially, which was the basic presupposition of astrology, and they don't explain the physical material development. They exist in an absolute space, which is the spirit. And it is out of this space that both men as the collective and men as an individual develop. If we don't have the collective unconscious, so then we must have the spiritual realm. And actually, when you take out the collective unconscious from the equation, you can get an integrative anthropology model of constitution of man. But I think we can explore this at another occasion when we talk about maybe another book, Stefana.
The Alchemy of Symptom or Cogito Individuationis?
The Alchemy of Symptom, I think we need to speak about first because it was written first, and it's really useful when you work with planets and zodiac psychoanalytically and with the IPAL method.